What is up, everybody? Solomon here. Super excited to be with Genfinity. Equally excited today to be able to interview the man, the myth, the legend himself, David Schwartz. Here we are again, Consensus 2024. David, I'd love to ask you as we start here, can you talk about Ripple's vision and the roadmap for, just an overview of the roadmap for institutional grade DeFi on the XRP ledger?
Sure. So Ripple's vision is to have DeFi applications on decentralized, censorship-resistant blockchains like the XRP ledger that also can have institutional participants that can meet their regulatory requirements and have meaningful interoperability between those two ecosystems. So the most obvious example of that is the stablecoin that we announced. A stablecoin is regulatory compliant. It's issued to customers of Ripple who go through KYC and AML proceedings, but then it winds up like on automated market makers, or people wind up holding it who are not customers of Ripple or connected to Ripple in any way. And it enables a sort of decentralized DeFi ecosystem that ties back to that regulatory compliant world. We see that happening with real world asset tokenization. We see that happening with on-chain lending. All of these applications where both institutions and sort of grassroots adoption can grow together. And the reason I think that that's so important is if you look at how compelling ecosystems grow, it's that synergy between grassroots adoption and enterprise adoption. That's what fired the development of the internet. If it's just a bunch of like tech nerds who really love the technology, that's not going to really ignite like grassroots adoption, like bulk adoption, because it's too focused on the technology. And if you just have enterprise adoption, well, that's great for enterprises, but that's not going to enable these DeFi use cases that are the reason we're all so passionate about the space. So I think the vision here, and I think it's the whole industry kind of turning that corner of building systems that both have an institutional component and a grassroots component that actually do work together, so it makes sense to have them in the same. It's not like there's this and they don't have anything to do with each other, which isn't very cool.
I think it's interesting too. I mean, if we, look back a few years compared to where we're at now, I always joke that I feel like I'm desensitized by the amount of kind of real world things that we're kind of seeing going on with the technology. Thinking about like the regulated liability network in the UK. And I know that Ripple's obviously had quite a few proof of concepts, but does it surprise you that we're seeing this level of like actual kind of, let's say, go live events with some of these areas of adoption? And would you expect that trend to continue over time?
I think the thing that surprised me the most is the pivot from the small projects with like second or third tier companies, which makes a lot of sense. If you're not the biggest in the space, you're very aggressive, you're very hungry, you have to try new things because you want to take market share. But what I really didn't expect was to see like tier one companies, HSBC, for example, BlackRock, like companies that we've all heard of that deal with like huge, absurd amounts of money experimenting with these new technologies this early, and it's not. And they're saying that these are not experiments for them. They're saying like this is it's early days, but this is going to be a product. This is something that we have some level of institutional commitment to. That I think is really surprising to see that, because again, I thought they would be the very drag kicking and screaming, right? It's like, Sony could have made the iPod, but they didn't. Apple did, and then like household name companies that have been around get dragged kicking and screaming into new technology. It's fascinating and exciting, I think, to see these tier one companies saying, we think tokenization of real world assets is going to be an $18 trillion business in just 4 years.
Yeah,
like that's surprising, and of course a very good sign.
Yeah, and I mean, on the RWA aspect, I mean, it's interesting to see this kind of shift, because tokenization of real world assets has been going on for, the past handful of years. You can think about real estate was like kind of the one maybe 3 or 4 years ago that everybody was talking about.
Very difficult from a regulatory standpoint.
For sure. But then when you think about, what real world assets actually are, I think a lot of the times people think about financial instruments, but really you can take it out to people, places, data, things, and what that kind of looks like as far as tokenization is concerned. We hear that, the whole world's going to be tokenized. Do you feel like that's a little bit of an obtuse statement, or where do you feel like makes sense for tokenization to occur in the near term and then looking further out?
I think financial instruments, things like treasuries and securities, tokenized stock, I think that makes a lot of sense, because where the benefits of like what public blockchains can do, because public blockchains are sort of expensive. Like if you were a bank, you wouldn't put all your customer data on a public blockchain. It doesn't make any sense. They're expensive. You have to be able to get some real value out of that. And where I think that value is like the clearest is in these financial use cases. where you have people who don't have access to like a good way to make a return. They can basically stuff money in their mattress, or their local currencies are subject to inflation, and they may not be able to adopt these sort of regulated things directly. Like they probably couldn't do business with Ripple directly, but they could get the Ripple stablecoin out of DEX, and they can have access to lending protocols where they could be the lenders, so they could get a return at very low risk without some company having to decide that they're worth serving, because they may have challenges of scale, regulatory issues. So I think that's where that makes the most. That's where the most. And I think other use cases will probably follow on later. But I think where the money is, makes the most sense. That where the people are the poorest served, where you don't have to be fantastic to be competitive. If you have to beat out, companies like JP Morgan Chase have spent billions of dollars building these financial products that are very efficient for specific use cases. Like if you need to move US dollars to Europe, like they've got that nailed. If you had to compete with them in that market sector to be successful, you would have to spend absurd amounts of money before you could ever do anything. So I think targeting the sort of long tail of underserved use cases where it's not profitable to build a product that's specifically, if you had to build the whole product just for them, it wouldn't make any sense. I think that's where that sort of long financial tail. And then it may, as you mentioned, like all people, places, other things. Real estate, I think, makes sense because real estate is very expensive.
Yeah.
It's difficult to use it as collateral for lending. It's difficult to do fractional ownership. So where there are specific pain points and there's high value, like that's great. Obviously, if there's low value, it's harder to justify spending money to fix the problem. And if there's no pain points, well, why would anybody care that you can maybe argue a theoretical advantage, but they don't see it tangibly.
And I would love if you, I know we talked about this last year just briefly, but I mean, the automated market maker, the AMM, is live,
yes.
Native within the XRP ledger. What does this represent for you? I mean, what have we kind of seen thus far as AMM usage? And then how do you kind of envision that maybe transforming as individual knowledge bases get up, or maybe institutions want to start leveraging things like the, like, I'm just curious your thoughts as far as where we're at now with the AMM, and then how people, in your opinion, will leverage it maybe in the future.
I think it's a good example of like the bridging between the sort of institutional use case and the sort of like ground up use case. Like institutional, like there are going to be enterprise grade stable coins that are going to be the tokens that these AMMs are trading. But there are going to be participants who may be, underserved, who take capital, buy into the AMM, and then they can get a yield from providing liquidity. And then there's liquidity. It's like a great mix. I think where the future gets interesting is where there's just more use of the liquidity. So if you're providing liquidity, your return is based on what the demand for liquidity is. And the demand for liquidity is not as high as obviously I would like. Obviously, however high it is, we would like to see it a lot higher. And so I think as these use cases, there's a sort of synergy. If people are using an asset for payments, then they need liquidity. If people are using an asset for loans and they're making payments, they need liquidity because they're going to be moving between different assets. So I think where there's that synergy, where AMMs become part of a vibrant ecosystem, where there's a lot of demand for liquidity. A supply of liquidity doesn't do you any good if there's no demand for it, and a demand for liquidity doesn't do you any good if there's no supply. And so I think growing those things where all of these use cases can sort of cross-pollinate and provide a sort of compelling, attractive sort of package for people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's kind of like that kind of whole economy of aspects that are being built out kind of simultaneously. We had the opportunity to interview Anchal from RippleX, maybe that was 3 or 4 months ago, and a really big focus, obviously, DID, so decentralized identifiers and digital identity. I'm curious from your standpoint, when you look at something like DID and like kind of this global standard that's kind of being worked on by a lot of different players, obviously, how you kind of feel that ties into institutional enterprise adoption. Obviously, when you think about identity on chain, you can start thinking about verifiable credentials and compliance aspects. I would love if you could maybe just walk us through that a little bit.
Sure. So imagine you want to onboard, you're an enterprise, you want to onboard some project onto the XRP ledger, or really anywhere in the DeFi ecosystem, and you have regulations of who you can do business with. So you may be able to enable DeFi use cases further down the line, but you can't do business with anonymous parties. You have to make sure that you're not, giving terrorists, people who are on the list of denied persons, all of that. Now, if you did all of that yourself, every customer would have to onboard with you directly. You would have a high cost in terms of verifying their identity. And the worst part is you have to store all the data. So now you need a cybersecurity, and if your data gets stolen, and it's terrible for your customers because one of the great things about DeFi is that we don't have to trust each other, right? We can have these enforcement mechanisms that make sure that you can't screw me and I can't screw you. But if I have to give you my identity, I have to trust your cybersecurity measures. And it's everybody says they're secure. It's very cheap to say you're secure. It costs nothing. It's very expensive to be secure. And one of the great things that decentralized identity does is it allows you to launch a regulatory compliant, let's say a stablecoin or a real world asset, or you want to tokenize securities of some kind, whatever you want to do, lending, you can do those things and you can onboard customers and you can meet KYC AML requirements without having to store all the data, without having to onboard the customers individually. You can decide that, hey, Fractal ID meets my regulatory requirements in the US, Jumio meets my regulatory requirements in these jurisdictions. And then you can onboard people through their DIDs, and then you don't have to store all the identity data. You don't have to figure out how you're going to do the identity verification. That's an amazing enabler for you. And it also means that if I don't know or trust you, I don't want to give you my identity information, but I can give you my DID because that's public. It only reveals the information if there's some regulatory need to know. You can onboard me as a customer without me having to trust you.
Yeah.
And so you don't have that barrier of we can't take on customers because customers don't trust us. And then you don't have the expense of having to secure that data. So I think that is a key enabler.
Do you think that as far as the DID aspects are concerned, the zero knowledge aspects are going to start to play more and more of a role to kind of streamline that minimum level of identity necessary to participate in whatever a user wants to participate in?
Yeah, I do think so. I'm fascinated. I'm a cryptographer, at heart. I started out that's how I got into this business. The new cryptographic primitives, particularly in the zero knowledge proof world, are just amazing to me. The rate of technological increase. There's a painful trade-off that we face in this business. We face it with identity. We face it in many other areas where you have to reveal a lot of information because there's no trust.
Yeah.
So if you don't trust me, I have to provide you a lot of evidence for you to believe things. And most blockchains work without trust. It's tremendous evidence. You can just grab the whole Ethereum blockchain and look at all the transactions. But on the flip side, privacy is important. We believe in privacy preservation because I'm worried that you might reveal data. Zero knowledge proofs have given us an ability to craft new trade-offs where I can prove to you that something is secure and you can verify it without me having to reveal the information behind I can prove that the proof exists without showing you the proof.
Yep.
It's amazing to me how much they've grown in just the past 3 or 4 years. And identity is one of those areas where you don't necessarily have to know my identity, but you have to know that if there was a court order to get that identity, someone would be able to respond to that court order.
Yeah.
And the less information I have to reveal to do that, the better. And in some cases, you may just need to know that I'm not on a particular, I'm not on a particular list. You may need no more information than that. And I may be able to provide a proof to you that I'm a human being who resides in the United States and is not on the list of denied people without revealing any more information than that to you. And that can be completely automated.
Yep.
So you could build a trading engine that trades a regulated asset and automatically trades to people who can prove that they're in the US jurisdiction but not on the list of sanctioned people without them revealing any more information at all. They could be completely anonymous otherwise. Those kinds of things really help to fix that sort of security privacy balance that's very challenging in our space.
I'm always interested, and I won't go down the rabbit hole here, I'll save this one, but how zero knowledge might tie into interoperability between different ecosystems even over time, where you just need to know the minimum level of information, verify that something existed or that it is in the state that it's supposed to be in, and then you...
A lot of people are working on that.
Yeah.
Nobody's quite solved that yet. I've looked at a lot of solutions. They all have problems with them. But I'm very hopeful, again, the rate of technology increase from where we were just 2 years ago on this problem. I'm very hopeful. And that's going to enable interoperability in bridges that really aren't trustless bridges yet. They just don't exist. We don't know how to build them. Or we can build them, but they might blow up. Because nobody, so here's the problem is, if something goes wrong with the bridge, either there's somebody who can fix it or there's nobody who can fix it.
Yeah.
If there's nobody who can fix it and something goes wrong, we all lose all our money.
Yep.
If there's somebody who can fix it when it's broken, that person could also fix it when it's not broken.
Yeah.
And we haven't solved that yet. I'm hopeful that we'll make progress, but it's a hard problem.
And you mentioned lending, obviously XLS 66 with the on-chain lending protocol is kind of in the works right now as well. What is that going to represent? I mean, it seems like we're kind of really getting into kind of the flywheel effect aspect of how this stuff is going to tie together on the XRPL in time. You think about tokenizing real world assets and then being able to borrow or lend against them in almost any currency, maybe over time. Can you maybe just walk us through the lending protocol, what you're excited about?
Yeah. So what's interesting about this version of the lending protocol is it really is another bridge between traditional finance and DeFi. So the lending side of it is traditional finance. There's somebody who does credit worthiness. They're not collateralized loans. Collateralized loans are only interesting to like rich people who want tax efficient ways to monetize their cryptocurrency profits without selling them, which is great. It's a legitimate use case, but it's not an interesting enterprise. I don't think so. Right? The interesting enterprise use case is like a normal loan, like a guy wants to buy a house or build a business or whatever, right? And for that to work, there has to be creditworthiness. There has to be some entity who can sue the person if they don't pay back. But what we could also do is we could have a DeFi side where there's tokens that represent claims against those loans, and people get paid back as those payments go in. And so if somebody doesn't make a payment back, there's a centralized operator who sues them in a known jurisdiction, but they put the money into a DeFi system that then distributes it. And if they fail to do that, the holders of the liquidity tokens could sue them.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting hybrid where you have this heavily regulated, like loans are heavily regulated. These would be like commercial loans or real estate loans. They're heavily regulated. They're traditional loans, except they're tokenized in this like Wild West DeFi system where they might be traded on a DEX or, and that ability to borrow against your assets is tremendously valuable, particularly for assets that are sort of held long term and only semi-liquid. Real estate is a good example. Like it's great to be able to borrow against real estate, but the friction in that industry is so high. And so that's another use case, high value, lots of existing pain points that can be addressed.
Yeah, we talked about, we had an interview with an individual that used to be at DTCC or SEC currency. I always mispronounce SEC currency, whatever it is. But he was talking about like, it's so fascinating to think about people being able to actually like in real time borrow against their house or their car once they're tokenized on chain, because it's just doesn't really exist right now as far as being able to seamlessly do something like that.
And then on the other side of that, let's say I have money and I want to return on a fairly safe, these are fairly safe loans that normally it's sort of difficult. Like if you're very wealthy and overserved, there's portfolios of loans that you can buy into through brokerages, and everything. Yeah. But that's super hard. Like some guy in Guatemala who just got paid for the day can't buy into those things. But on a DeFi ecosystem, he can buy liquidity tokens on a DEX with whatever asset he has. As long as there's some asset he can get that he can trade on that DEX, there'll be a path that he can get exposure to commercial real estate loans on the lending side.
Yep.
That's cool.
100%.
Because those are people who are just terribly underserved, and all they need is some on-ramp.
Yep. So another notable announcement recently, obviously Ripple and Peer Assist in the EVM sidechain for the XRP ledger, utilizing EVM operating or EVM OS. I'll mispronounce that and butcher that name, but I know it's EVM operating system or OS. Yes. What does this represent? I mean, what are some of the things from like I know that there's grants, there's areas of grants involved. There's obviously potential for kind of liquidity back and forth, but what are you most excited about as far as the sidechain, the EVM aspects are concerned?
Well, the XRP ledger is a sort of fixed function blockchain. It has a lot of functions. It has an AMM, it has issued assets, it has stable coins, it's going to have a lending protocol, but it doesn't have like Turing complete smart contracts. So you can't easily extend it for functionality that you want that everybody else is not interested in. You can do that on an EVM chain. But if you have like the XRP ledger over here and an EVM sidechain over here, if they don't interoperate, then it's just another thing that has nothing to do with, it doesn't expand on what you can do like in the XRP ecosystem. And you have these two things that you're claiming are sort of stuck together, but they don't work together, then it's sort of meaningless. Yeah. Again, it's like putting a TradFi system on a public blockchain, but nobody can access it, except for like the enterprise users, which some people have done. Like, it's not interesting. So what you need is communication between those blockchains so that it feels like a seamless ecosystem. And as long as you're doing that, you might as well connect it to other ecosystems that are like the Ethereum ecosystem. And Cosmos is like a system that does that, Axelar, Corium a little bit. Like there's all of these different ecosystems that have tried to tie blockchains together. And what's exciting about that is that if I was the only company on the internet, I would have a hard time, like if I ran the only company on the internet, I would have a hard time getting you to carry a smartphone, getting you to have home internet, because I can't provide 8,000 service, right? I can't provide the things that make the internet compelling. The reason the internet is compelling is because you have a smartphone, home internet access, you can go to any website, access any service, and it all works great. Like there may be some service that you've never heard of that you find out about tonight, you find it on the internet, and it's great for you. And it all just works. And that's what we need. We need that level of interoperability. Otherwise, users are just not going to. If they could only access the stuff that Ripple built, or even only access the stuff in the XRPL ecosystem, it's just not going to be compelling enough like the way the internet is compelling. And so we need that. We need interoperability. If your money is over here and you need it over here, and it's painful for you to get, like the very first level of interoperability is you should be able to move tokens around across like different ecosystems, and that way they feel connected, and they really are connected. And so if the asset you want is on another blockchain, or you want to access something that's on the EVM sidechain, it's a smart contract application, and you have XRP on the XRP ledger, you should be able to do that with minimal pain, and ideally it would be completely invisible to you. Like on the internet, you don't necessarily think about where is the server, what software
am I using
is the server?
TCP/IP right now?
Right. Are they on gigabit Ethernet? Are they on fiber? You know, what are how all are they on Wi-Fi? Am I? It all just works.
Yeah.
You don't have to think about that, and that's the world we want to get into. Nobody's completely solved that problem yet. It doesn't gel into one ecosystem yet, but asset portability is a big part of that, and projects like EVM OS, which uses Cosmos for asset portability, Axelar, which has a bridge, Corium, which has bridge technology. Nobody's got the perfect solution yet, but these solutions work really well, at least for asset portability, and they're improving by leaps and bounds. And so I think that if we're going to turn that corner to like that institutional adoption and grassroots adoption that really makes us something that everybody in the world finds compelling, interoperability is going to have to be. It's going to have to. You shouldn't have to think, oh, this isn't part of the Ethereum. This thing I'm doing is on Ethereum, and this thing I'm doing is on, you know, Avalanche. Or like, if you have to think about that, we're losing.
Yep, 100%. I know that you gave a speech here today at Consensus as well, and I heard that there may be a couple of innovations that you guys were excited about talking about, like that were kind of talked about up on stage there. Is there any way you could share any of that with us today?
Well, so today we started talking about oracles, which are necessary to do things like collateralized lending. You have to know the value of the collateral to have margin calls and make that system automated. So there's a lot of applications, bundling things into bundles of assets, fractional ownership. A lot of these use cases require Oracle support. And that's another thing where the oracles are probably going to be regulated institutions that you could sue if they screwed up. But anyone can use the data from the oracle, connects to a DeFi ecosystem. And the other one is multi-purpose tokens. So currently on the XRP ledger, we have fungible tokens that we call issued assets. You can use, and we have non-fungible tokens, but there's some use cases that are sort of in between, where neither one really works well. The example I usually use is concert tickets. Like, if you get 0.99 of a concert ticket, do we let you in? I mean, like, it's awkward. And they're sort of fungible and sort of not, because there's different seats at the concert. And also assets that have to have an asset description. So issued assets on the XRP ledger don't really exist as a thing. Like, you have some of an asset and I have some of an asset, but the asset itself isn't real. Like, if you have gold and I have gold, all the gold in the world is sort of a notional. It's not a thing that you can attach properties to. Multi-purpose tokens, the asset itself is a thing that you can attach properties to, and that's very useful for assets that have regulatory compliance issues or have properties of the asset itself that need to be adjusted. Like if they have an inflation rate or something, that's a property of the asset. And so the asset has to be a thing that you can assign properties to. So multi-purpose tokens, these are not things that you will use directly, but they're enablers for future use cases. They could be things like derivatives, things like fractional ownership, collateralized lending versus the more TradFi type lending that we've already proposed. So it's a path forward to newer technologies over the next year or so.
And I would love your thoughts. I mean, we like I mentioned kind of early on, like as far as so many initiatives going live, like how early do you still feel like we are as far as mass adoption is concerned? And I think you alluded to it in a couple minutes ago, where it's like we need this stuff just to be operating without us even really knowing that it's operating.
And we need real institutional adoption institutional adoption. So for example, like Ripple has institutional adoption in the sense that we have customers that are using like XRP for payments. We have customers that are using stablecoins for payments, but that doesn't bring their customers onto the blockchain. So while that's good, that doesn't really turbocharge mass adoption the way things like tokenized real world assets could. If there's tokenized real world assets, if there's lending, let's say there's TradFi lending, and you're like, you know what? I have this money that I don't have a good way to invest. I need to get on the blockchain as a blockchain user so I can lend, right? You're now a blockchain user. That's what, if we're going to get mass adoption, what we need is institutions that are bringing their customers into blockchains. That's like the way that you're going to get mass, right? Amazon brings their customers into the internet. You want to be an Amazon customer? You're an internet user. Yep. You want to be a Twitter customer? You're an internet user. You want to be, if you want to use anything on the internet, you have to become an internet user, and now you're everybody's target market. These use cases, these use cases that I've been talking about that bring the customers onto the blockchain, are what I think could turn that corner to a realistic path to real like mass adoption. And it's exciting to me that I think like just in the past year or so, we've really started to see HSBC, for example, talking about tokenized gold. And not just as a like, wouldn't it be cool if, wasn't this something like they're committed to that as a product. You know, there's someone at that company who's like, this is my thing to build. Like my job is to make this happen. And we didn't see that before. We saw press releases and we saw, wouldn't it be cool if, but that's not the same thing as, you know, hey, I'm David and it's my job to make this a product of our company.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that. We're seeing them going through the regulatory hoops because it's very hard for small companies to go through regulatory hoops. But the nice thing about these approaches is like, yeah, it's a heavy lift to launch a stablecoin, but Ripple does it and everybody can use it. Yeah, it's a heavy lift to do real world asset tokenization for financial products, but you know, somebody does it and then everybody can use it. That's exciting. And so I'm very hopeful, more than usual, that we're going to see that acceleration to the mass adoption I think we all want to see.
We only got a couple questions left. I know you're a technologist, so I think one thing that I'm curious to pick your brain on is, we heard a stat that there's like, I think it's either 6,000 or 7,000 AI startups in 2024. And I think that we see industry trends every couple of years. Some of them get recycled, which is pretty interesting, or rebranded. So like DePIN is obviously something that we are seeing all across the board right now, and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
In what ways do you kind of figure, because I've heard different takes on this. How do you think AI ties into blockchain in meaningful ways over time?
So let me just say that I'm not an expert on this, and my opinion is, you know, it's an informed opinion certainly, but it's very predict the future-y. And when you're not involved in a space, your general default position is to not be super excited about it. And I'm not a person who gets excited about things easily. So I'll tell you where I am excited and where I'm not. But just because I'm not excited about something doesn't mean. So I'll start with what I'm not excited about because it's the most interesting. I don't think that this is going to be a way to make like hundreds of trillions of dollars that's going to like totally like reform the economy. Now, I might be wrong about that.
AI.
Yeah,
AI.
I think the demand is exaggerated a bit. I think that the types of products that are the most likely to come out are not going to have incredibly high value. Like they'll be educational, they'll be search engines. Like those are not the sort of, they're not going to reform the economy. Could be wrong. Maybe, you know, it's always a safe bet to say that a new technology won't be revolutionary, right? You're right 99% of the time. It's the 1% of the time when you're wrong that it really matters. I mean, you can find all the people who said what was it? I can't remember which economist it was who said like the internet will have no more impact than the fax machine. You know, obviously famously wrong. Always a safe bet. But where I am excited are about these use cases that are not as sexy. They're not going to make trillions of dollars, but they're very interesting. So one of them is educational. I can create documentation for the XRP ledger that's suitable for a particular audience, but I can't create documentation for, say, the automated market maker that's suitable for every single audience that there could be. But AI can do a fantastic job of taking documentation that's at a technical level and explaining it to a 5-year-old, or to someone who knows conventional finance but not distributed system, or someone who knows Bitcoin inside out but is not a finance person. Like AI is really good at helping people to understand things. It's good at analyzing code. It's good at finding flaws. It's good at speeding development, and it's getting better at those sort of narrower use cases. It's good in applications where it's guiding an expert and saving them effort and time. And so I'm excited about those types of use cases. And I could be wrong about, you know, it changing the world. I guess I don't know if I want to be wrong about that or not. But I do think, you know, education, development, security audits, those kinds of things, and a lot of ordinary life tasks. I don't know how many people, you know, have used products like ChatGPT or you know, these coding Copilot. They're actually pretty darn good. Like they do automate a lot or speed up a lot of life tasks as long as you can reject the nonsense.
For sure, 100%. All right, final question here for you, David. As far as, you know, obviously the XRPL continues to evolve. It's never going to kind of stay stagnant just as the space continues to evolve. I would love your just personal vision for kind of the future of the network. Where do you expect us to be end of the year and then even moving further out? I'm sure we'll be having another one of these discussions in a year from now, but I would love if you could maybe give us your vision for the network.
I think my earliest vision was this idea of public pools of liquidity that anybody could contribute to and draw off of. So in the initial vision, the idea was like, I need to make a payment to somebody in Australia. There's probably someone who has money in Australia for no particular reason. They just happen to have it there because that's where it is. And they're perfectly happy to take more money in the United States for their money in Australia. And I would pay somebody, you know, a fee someone who's in the business of providing that liquidity. But somebody who has money in Australia that they don't want there might be willing to just like, they might be more happier to have, like we can match make on a massive scale. That was the earliest vision. It was very focused on payments, and the XRP ledger is still great for payments. But I think like the new idea is like providing financial products, things like lending, things like asset exchange, things like exposure, investing, providing these sort of core financial services in a decentralized and open way, but that's tightly connected to these regulatory compliant like enterprise adoptions, where the enterprise adoption brings the customers on, and then the customers attract the enterprises, and you get that virtuous cycle.
Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, you think about how many customers, like once these real world entities start coming on chain, and well, the levels of compliance would have to be there and everything else that ties in, their customers may come with them.
So that's the idea. And then you don't necessarily have to be their direct customer, right? So like if a regulatory compliant entity creates a lending pool, the liquidity tokens may just trade on the DEX. And so you could have exposure to that regulatory compliant lending protocol anonymously, potentially.
Well, it's been an honor, David. Always such a wealth of knowledge, and looking forward to seeing all the innovation coming out of Ripple, looking forward to seeing all the contributions to the XRP ledger as well, and looking forward to the lending protocol going live as well as everything else, and DID aspects. It's going to be really cool to watch. Thank you so much.
Fantastic talking to you.
Thank you.